The Burning Secret of Highland Towers. I should have known something was wrong when nobody would meet my eyes in the elevator. My name is Emma Mitchell, and 6 months ago I moved to Chicago to pursue my master's in psychology at Northwestern. Like most grad students, I was desperately searching for affordable housing in one of America's most expensive cities. When I found the listing for a 3-bedroom apartment on the 17th floor of Highland Towers for less than half the market rate, I thought I'd stumbled on the deal of a lifetime. I really should have wondered why. The building itself was impressive, a 1920s Art Deco high-rise that had been recently renovated, according to the listing. The leasing agent, Mr. Peterson, seemed almost too eager to have me sign the paperwork. He barely looked at my credit check or employment verification before pushing the lease across his desk. "You'll be sharing with 2 other graduate students," he said, shuffling papers nervously. "The previous tenants moved out unexpectedly. Family emergency." I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too excited about finding an affordable place in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The fact that I'd have roommates was actually a bonus. Being new to the city, I was hoping to make some friends. That's how I met Sarah and Marcus. Sarah was working on her PhD in art history at the University of Chicago, while Marcus was finishing his MBA at Booth. They seemed nice enough, if a bit quiet. We all moved in on the same day, and I noticed right away that none of the building staff would help us with our boxes. The maintenance guy actually crossed himself when we passed him in the hallway. The apartment itself was beautiful, in a faded sort of way. High ceilings, hardwood floors, huge windows overlooking Lake Michigan. But there was something off about it. The layout was strange. 2 bedrooms connected by a Jack and Jill bathroom, with the 3rd bedroom isolated on the other side of the kitchen. A locked door in the hallway that Mr. Peterson told us led to storage. And despite the alleged renovation, everything felt old. Not antique old, but decay old. The first month was relatively normal, aside from the fact that none of our neighbors would speak to us. If we got in the elevator, they would get out. If we tried to make small talk in the lobby, they would hurry away. The doorman would only nod, never speaking a word. Then the burning started. It was subtle at first, a strange smell, like scorched hair and cooking meat that would drift through the apartment at odd hours. We blamed it on the neighbors, but when Sarah went to complain, she discovered that the entire 17th floor was empty except for our apartment. "That's impossible," Marcus said. "I hear footsteps above us all the time." We were on the top floor. The smell got worse. Our clothes began showing up with small burn marks, as if someone had pressed cigarettes into them. Books would appear singed around the edges. One morning, I found my pillow with a perfect handprint burned into it. The fabric blackened and still warm to the touch. That's when the dreams began. We all had them, though we didn't talk about them at first. Dreams of smoke and screaming, of running through endless hallways while something pursued us. Dreams of a woman, her skin blackened and peeling, standing at the foot of our beds. Dreams of burning. Sarah was the first to see her while awake. She was working late one night on her dissertation, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop. I was already in bed when I heard her scream. By the time Marcus and I got to the kitchen, Sarah was huddled in the corner, pointing at the locked door in the hallway.
"She was there,"
Sarah sobbed.
"She was looking through the gap under the door. Her face. Oh God, her face."
We tried to comfort her, tell her she was just tired and stressed, but then we saw the handprints. Dark, sooty marks on the hardwood floor, leading from the locked door to where Sarah sat. The next day we demanded answers from Mr. Peterson. He tried to brush us off, but Marcus can be very persuasive when he wants to be. Finally, the leasing agent broke down. "There was a fire," he admitted. 10 years ago. A graduate student, Amanda Chen. She was working on some kind of chemical research in her apartment, which was against the lease agreement, I might add. Something went wrong. The whole floor, well, they managed to contain it, but... "She died?" I asked. Mr. Peterson wouldn't meet our eyes. "They never found her body. The fire, it was hot enough to melt steel. They had to rebuild the entire floor. That's why none of the other units are rented. People say they can still smell the burning." We should have moved out immediately, but graduate students in Chicago don't have many options, and none of us could afford market rate rents. So we stayed, telling ourselves it would be fine, that we didn't really believe in ghosts. Then Marcus started sleepwalking. I found him one night, standing in front of the locked door, his hand pressed against the wood. He was mumbling something about chemistry and reaction rates. When I touched his shoulder, his skin was burning hot. The next morning, his hand was covered in second-degree burns. After that, things escalated quickly. The smell of burning became constant. We would find ashes in our beds, no matter how many times we changed the sheets. The sound of footsteps and crying echoed through the apartment at all hours, and always, there was the sense of being watched by something that harbored an intense, consuming hatred. Sarah was the first to break. We found her note on the kitchen table one morning. She had gone to stay with her parents in Milwaukee. She wasn't coming back. That's when Marcus told me what he had been researching. Amanda Chen wasn't just any graduate student, he said, showing me old newspaper articles on his laptop. She was a prodigy, 23 years old and already working on her second PhD. She was developing some kind of new energy source, something about harnessing thermal energy at the molecular level. What went wrong? I asked. Marcus's face was grim. According to the investigation, nothing went wrong. The fire was deliberate. They found evidence that she had barricaded herself in her apartment. The sprinkler system had been disabled, and the chemical accelerants, they were placed strategically. She killed herself? No, Marcus said. The police reports suggest she was trying to kill something else. The walls of her apartment were covered in equations and symbols, and they found journals. She wrote about something following her, something that was trying to take her body, use her research for its own purposes. I thought about the dreams, about the burning smell that never went away, about the thing we sometimes glimpsed in mirrors, a figure that was both Amanda and not Amanda, its flesh constantly burning and regenerating. That night, I woke to the sound of screaming. Not the usual distant cries we had grown used to, but immediate, terrified screams coming from Marcus's room. I ran to help him, but the door was locked. Through the keyhole, I could see flames. Not normal fire, but something that burned with a strange purplish light. And in the midst of that light was a figure. Amanda Chen, her lab coat still pristine despite her charred flesh, was standing over Marcus's bed. But there was something else there too, something darker that seemed to shift and flow around her like smoke. "I won't let you have them," Amanda's voice said, but it was distorted, like several voices speaking at once. "I burned myself to stop you. I'll burn everything to stop you." The thing made of smoke reached for Marcus, and Amanda's burning hands reached with it. I could smell burning flesh, hear Marcus's screams turning to gurgles. I ran. God help me, I ran. By the time the fire department arrived, the entire 17th floor was engulfed in those strange purple flames. They never found Marcus's body. They never found anything except ashes and burn marks and equations scorched into the walls. The official report blamed faulty wiring. The building's insurance paid out, and Hyaline Towers was renovated again. I heard they're renting the 17th floor apartments at half price. I live in Milwaukee now, sharing an apartment with Sarah. We don't talk about what happened in Chicago. We don't talk about the dreams we still have, about the smell of burning that sometimes drifts through our new home, about the equations we find ourselves writing without meaning to. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Amanda Chen and what she was trying to stop. I think about how fire can be both destructive and purifying. And I wonder if, somewhere in that building, on that 17th floor, she's still burning, still fighting, still trying to protect others from what she discovered. Because the thing is, the dreams aren't just dreams anymore. Last night, I found a burnt handprint on my pillow. And when I looked in the mirror this morning, just for a moment, I saw Amanda standing behind me. She was smiling, but her teeth were black with soot, and her eyes were full of smoke. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're looking for an apartment in Chicago, and you find a too-good-to-be-true deal on the 17th floor of Hyaline Towers, don't take it. No matter how desperate you are, no matter how tight your budget is, don't sign that lease. Because Amanda Chen is still there, still burning, still fighting something that wants to do more than just kill us. And sometimes, late at night, when I smell burning and see equations writing themselves in ash on my walls, I think she might be losing. The smoke is spreading, and it's hungry. Last night, Sarah started sleepwalking. The Price of Innocence. I never should have gone to Vermont. That's what I keep telling myself as I barricade the doors of my apartment, hands shaking so badly I can barely slide the bookshelf into place. The scrape of wood against wood seems deafening in the silence. I pause, listening, my breath catching in my throat at every distant sound, car doors slamming, voices drifting up from the street, the hum of the city at night. None of those sounds matter. What I'm listening for doesn't make noise, not unless it wants to. Let me start from the beginning. Maybe writing this down will help me make sense of everything that's happened, or maybe it'll serve as a warning to others. Either way, I need to get it out before whatever happens next. 3 weeks ago, I decided I needed a break from everything. My job at the tech startup was crushing me. My relationship had imploded spectacularly, and the constant noise of Boston was driving me insane. I needed quiet, space, time to think. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I packed up my camping gear, threw it in my Subaru, and headed north to the Green Mountains. The ranger at the station barely looked up from his crossword puzzle when I registered for a backcountry permit. "Stay on the marked trails," he drawled, stamping my form. "Weather's been weird lately. Had some strange reports from hikers." I should have asked what he meant by strange, but I was too eager to get started, too ready to leave civilization behind. I just nodded, grabbed my permit, and hit the trail. The first week was exactly what I needed. I found a perfect camping spot near a small stream, far enough from the main trail that I rarely saw other hikers. The forest wrapped around me like a cocoon, the white noise of the stream drowning out my thoughts. I spent my days hiking, reading, and watching the light filter through the canopy. At night, I'd sit by my small campfire and look up at the stars through gaps in the trees. The dreams started during the second week. They were subtle at first. Fragments of white movement at the edge of my vision, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. I'd wake up convinced I'd heard hoofbeats, only to find the forest silent and still. I blamed it on isolation, on too much time alone with my thoughts. Then I saw the first signs. It was a Tuesday morning, I think. The days had started to blur together. I was following a game trail I'd discovered, hoping to find some interesting photos for my Instagram. Yes, I know how that sounds. City boy playing explorer. The trail led me to a clearing I hadn't seen before, and that's when I noticed something was wrong. The grass was pressed flat in a perfect circle, about 30 feet in diameter. At first, I thought it might be from deer bedding down, but the pattern was too precise. And in the center of the circle was a pile of bones, picked clean and bleached white in the sun. I should have left right then. Should have packed up my camp and headed back to civilization. But curiosity has always been my weakness. Instead of leaving, I took out my phone and started taking pictures. The bones were definitely from multiple animals. I could see what looked like deer, rabbit, and something larger that I couldn't identify. They were arranged with an unsettling precision, smaller bones radiating out from larger ones like the spokes of a wheel. And there was something else, something that made my skin crawl. Many of the larger bones had deep scoring marks, as if something with incredibly sharp teeth had been gnawing on them. I was so focused on photographing the bones that I almost missed the sound. A soft snort, like a horse clearing its nostrils. When I looked up, my heart stopped. It stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the shadows of the trees. Even in the dim light, its coat gleamed an impossible white, like fresh snow or polished pearl. Its mane was long and silken, flowing in a non-existent breeze. And from its forehead, a spiral horn caught what little sunlight filtered through the canopy, throwing off rainbow refractions that danced across the forest floor. A unicorn. A fucking unicorn. My first thought was that I must be hallucinating. Too many days alone in the woods, too little human contact. But hallucinations don't leave hoof prints in soft earth, and they definitely don't smell like what was wafting across the clearing. A sickly, sweet odor of decay masked by something that reminded me of cotton candy and rotting flowers. I stood perfectly still, phone forgotten in my hand, as it took a step forward. Its movement was liquid grace, each hoof placing precisely, silently. But something was wrong about the way it moved, like watching a nature documentary played at slightly the wrong speed. Then it raised its head, and I saw its eyes. They weren't the gentle eyes of a horse. They weren't even the predator's eyes I'd seen in nature documentaries about wolves or big cats. These were something else entirely. Bottomless black pools that seemed to absorb the light around them. Looking into them felt like staring into an open grave, and they were fixed directly on me. The unicorn took another step forward, and that's when I noticed something else wrong. Its muzzle was stained dark, and what I had taken for shadow between its teeth was actually gore. Fresh gore, still wet enough to catch the light. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. The unicorn's ears flicked forward, tracking my movement. Another step, another. Its horn lowered slightly, and I saw that it wasn't the pure crystal of fairy tales. The spiral groove that wrapped around it was dark with old stains. Then it smiled. I don't mean it pulled back its lips in a horse's expression of aggression. I mean it smiled, lips peeling back to reveal row after row of sharp, gleaming teeth, far more than any herbivore should have, arranged in concentric circles like a lamprey's mouth. I ran. I'd like to say I kept my head, that I remembered my wilderness training about not running from predators. But in that moment, I was pure animal instinct, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or safety. Behind me, I heard it laugh, a high, tinkling sound like breaking glass that morphed into something deeper, wetter. Then came the hoofbeats. They started slow, almost lazy. The sound seemed to come from all directions at once, echoing off the trees, until I couldn't tell if I was running toward or away from them. My lungs burned, branches whipped at my face, but I didn't dare slow down. The hoofbeats got faster, closer. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The unicorn was following, but it wasn't running. It was flowing between the trees like liquid mercury, its body elongating and contracting in ways that made my mind recoil. Its horn seemed longer now, dripping something dark that smoked where it hit the ground. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and compress like the creature's body. At some point, I burst out of the woods onto the main trail, my feet carrying me automatically toward my campsite. The hoofbeats had stopped, but I could feel it watching me, hunting me. I reached my tent and practically dove inside, zipping it up with trembling hands as if nylon could protect me from what I'd seen. I spent the night curled in my sleeping bag, clutching my hunting knife, listening to the sounds outside. Something circled my tent all night. Sometimes the hoofbeats were slow and measured. Sometimes they were frantic and irregular. Sometimes they stopped completely, replaced by a wet sound like something large chewing. Once, I heard that tinkling laugh again, closer this time, followed by what sounded like a child crying. I didn't sleep. When dawn finally came, I forced myself to look outside. The ground around my tent was marked with hoof prints, but they weren't normal horse tracks. They were too deep, and in places, they seemed to shift and change shape even as I watched them, like they couldn't decide what form to take. That should have been enough to send me running. But what I saw next froze me in place. Hanging from the branches of the trees surrounding my campsite were dozens of small, white shapes. At first, I thought they were cloth or paper fluttering in the morning breeze. Then one moved, and I realized they were smaller versions of what I'd seen in the clearing. Baby unicorns, each no bigger than a house cat, their coats dull and stained with dirt and blood. They were watching me with those same black eyes. I started packing my gear with frantic speed, not caring what I left behind. One of the small creatures dropped from its branch, landing silently a few feet away. It took a step toward me, head tilted in a way that was almost cute, if you could ignore the fact that its mouth was slowly opening to reveal the same nightmare arrangement of teeth as its parent. I threw my knife without thinking. The blade caught it in the throat, and the sound it made. Christ, I'll never forget that sound. It was like a child's scream mixed with the screech of metal on metal, high enough to make my teeth ache. Black blood pulsed from the wound, eating into the ground like acid. The other small ones started dropping from the trees. I grabbed my backpack and ran, leaving the tent and most of my gear behind. Behind me, that awful scream continued, joined by others, building into a chorus that made my vision blur. I ran until my legs gave out, until I reached my car, until I was on the highway doing 90 with all the windows up and the radio blasting to drown out the memory of those screams. That was 3 days ago. I thought I was safe once I got back to the city. I thought the concrete and steel and constant noise would protect me. But last night, I heard hoofbeats in the parking garage beneath my apartment. And when I looked out my window this morning, I saw something white moving between the cars. Something that left smoking hoof prints in the asphalt. They're getting closer. The mother is out there somewhere hunting me. I killed her child, and now she's going to make me pay. I've seen the news reports. Missing pets, strange animal attacks, a homeless man found with his chest cavity hollowed out. The police are blaming it on coyotes or feral dogs, but I know better. I can hear hoofbeats on the stairs now, slow and deliberate. The power in my building just went out, and there's a smell coming through the vents. Cotton candy and rotting flowers. If you're reading this, stay away from the woods. Stay away from anything that looks too perfect, too pure. And if you ever see something white moving between the trees, something with a spiral horn and eyes like empty wells, the door is splintering. I can see something white seeping through the cracks like smoke, reforming into something solid. Its horn is longer now, dripping that black substance that's eating through my floor. Its mouth is opening, revealing those endless rows of teeth and its eyes. God, those eyes. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, The fields of Echo Valley. The first time I saw them was on Route 50, somewhere between Carson City and Ely, Nevada. It was that kind of darkness you only get in the American West, absolute and consuming, where the stars seem to mock the tiny beam of your headlights cutting through the void. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight, trying to make it to my new job in Salt Lake City after leaving San Francisco behind. The radio had long since devolved into static, and my phone had lost signal hours ago. The rent on my Bay Area apartment had finally broken me. When the tech company I worked for offered remote work from anywhere in the country, I jumped at the chance. Utah wasn't my first choice, but the cost of living was right, and I told myself the mountains would make up for leaving the ocean behind. What I didn't count on was the endless emptiness between here and there, or the things that emptiness could hide. The first sign something was wrong was when my headlights caught something impossible. There was a family walking along the shoulder of the highway. A man, woman, and little girl, all dressed like they'd stepped out of a Depression-era photograph. The man wore overalls and a cotton shirt, the woman a faded flower print dress, and the little girl a simple pinafore. They shouldn't have been there. Not at 3 a.m., not in the middle of nowhere, not in clothes like that. I slowed down, my tired brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They weren't carrying anything, no bags, no water, nothing you'd need for a walk through the desert at night. As I passed them, none of them turned to look at my car. They just kept walking, heads down, moving with the slow, shuffling gait of people who had nowhere to go, but all the time in the world to get there. I checked my rearview mirror, but they were already gone, swallowed by the darkness behind me. I blamed it on fatigue, on the way the mind plays tricks after too many hours on empty roads. I turned up the air conditioning, opened my window, did all the things they tell you to do to stay alert. I even pulled over at the next rest stop, a lonely concrete building with flickering fluorescent lights that attracted vast clouds of moths. The rest stop bathroom was the kind of place that features in horror movies. Cracked tiles, rust-stained sinks, and mirrors that had seen better days. I splashed water on my face and told myself to get it together. 4 more hours to Salt Lake City. I could make it. Back on the road, I turned on my audiobook, Stephen King's The Stand, because apparently I hadn't learned my lesson about scary stories on dark highways. The narrator's voice helped keep me focused, and for a while, I managed to forget about the family I'd seen. Until I saw them again. They were walking along the shoulder, just like before, but that was impossible. I'd been driving 70 miles an hour for at least 40 minutes. There was no way they could be ahead of me. Yet there they were, the same 3 figures in their antiquated clothes, moving with that same shuffling gait. This time, as I passed them, the little girl looked up. In the brief flash of my headlights, I saw her face was gray and sunken, her eyes dark holes in a mask of skin that looked like it had been underwater for too long. I jerked the wheel, nearly running off the road, and had to fight to get the car back under control. When I looked in the rearview mirror, they were gone again. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I needed to stop. There had to be a town somewhere ahead, a motel, anything. The next road sign told me Echo was 20 miles ahead. I'd never heard of it, but right then it sounded like paradise. Echo, Nevada turned out to be little more than a cluster of buildings huddled against the base of a mountain. The only business still showing lights was a gas station with an attached diner. I pulled in, my tires crunching on gravel, and sat there for a moment, gathering my courage to step out into the night. The diner was empty except for an elderly waitress and a man I assumed was the cook, visible through the service window. A bell tinkled as I pushed open the door, and the waitress looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. I slid onto a stool at the counter. "You could say that. Is there a motel around here?" She poured me a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been sitting on the burner for hours. "Old Western, about a mile up the road. Not much, but it's clean." She studied my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, letting the warmth seep into my cold fingers. "Actually, I saw something strange on the highway. A family walking along the road. They looked old-fashioned, like they were from another time." The waitress and cook exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. "Would this be about 40 miles back?" the cook asked, leaning through the window. "Just past the old Thompson place?" I shrugged. "I don't know. It was the middle of nowhere. But I saw them twice, which is impossible unless they weren't really there," the waitress finished. She sighed and topped off my coffee. "That'd be the Wheelers. Local story. They had a farm out there during the Dust Bowl, tried to make it work even after everyone else gave up. Story goes they lost everything in '33. Crops failed, bank came calling. Rather than leave their land, well, she made a gesture that needed no explanation. They killed themselves?" The cook nodded. "Whole family. Found them in their barn. Since then, people see them walking the highway sometimes. Always at night, always in the same clothes they died in. They say the Wheelers are still looking for their farm, not knowing it's been gone nearly a century now." I should have laughed it off. Ghost stories in a desert diner at 3 a.m., it was too cliché to be real. But I couldn't forget the little girl's face, those hollow eyes, that waterlogged skin. "They ever hurt anyone?" The waitress shook her head. "Not that we've heard. They're just lost, stuck in their own time, their own tragedy. Some folks say they're still trying to find their way to California, where they should have gone when things got bad. Others think they're just walking the boundaries of their old property, forever." I finished my coffee and got directions to the motel. As I was paying, the cook said, "Word of advice? If you see them again, just keep driving. Don't slow down, don't stop. They're not dangerous, but grief like that, it can be catching, like a disease. You don't want to let it touch you." The motel was exactly what you'd expect. A low-slung building with peeling paint and a neon sign missing several letters. But the bed was clean, and I was too exhausted to care about the water stains on the ceiling or the way the air conditioner rattled like it was harboring angry spirits. I slept fitfully, dreaming of dust storms and endless highways. In my dreams, I was walking along Route 50, but my feet never seemed to touch the ground. A little girl held my hand, her skin cold and damp, and together we searched for something I knew we'd never find. The sun was setting when I woke up. I hadn't meant to sleep so long, but my body had clearly needed it. I checked out and got back on the road, telling myself I'd make it to Salt Lake City before full dark. I didn't see the Wheelers again that night, or any night after. But sometimes, when I'm driving Utah's lonely highways after dark, I find myself checking the shoulders of the road, half expecting to see 3 figures walking slowly through the night. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the desert, I swear I can hear a little girl's laughter, empty as a dust storm and just as lost. 2 years later, I was researching the history of Route 50 for a local interest piece. I'd started freelance writing on the side, when I found an old newspaper article from 1933. It was about the Wheeler family, Thomas, Mary, and their daughter Eleanor. The article included a photograph, grainy and faded, showing 3 people standing in front of a farmhouse. They were wearing the exact clothes I'd seen them in that night. The article mentioned something the diner cook and waitress hadn't told me. Before they died, the Wheelers had tried one last desperate thing to save their farm. They'd planted a new type of wheat, something they'd gotten from a traveling salesman who'd promised it would grow in any conditions. The seeds had been unusually dark, almost black, and the few stalks that had grown had produced grain that looked wrong somehow, twisted and dark, like something that had grown in complete darkness. The local preacher had advised them to burn the crop, saying there was something ungodly about it. But by then, the Wheelers were desperate. They harvested what little had grown and made bread from it. 3 days later, they were found in their barn. The coroner's report said they'd died by hanging, but a young deputy, quoted near the end of the article, said something that made my blood run cold. He said that when they cut the bodies down, their skin had been gray and waterlogged, as if they'd drowned instead of hanged. And in their pockets, they'd found handfuls of those black seeds, clutched so tightly they'd had to break their fingers to pry them loose. The article ended with a quote from Mary Wheeler's diary, found in the farmhouse. "The wheat whispers at night. It promises to save us, but I fear the price may be too high. Thomas says we have no choice. Eleanor says the seeds sing to her. God forgive us for what we're about to do." I closed my laptop and went to stand by my apartment window, looking out at the Salt Lake Valley. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. In the distance, I could see the endless fields of wheat stretching toward the horizon, golden waves rippling in the evening breeze. But here and there, in the deepening shadows, I thought I could see patches of darker growth, places where the wheat looked almost black in the fading light. And for just a moment, I thought I heard something carried on the wind. The sound of singing, soft and low, like a mother calling her child home. I closed my blinds and turned on all the lights in my apartment. That night, I dreamed of wheat fields stretching forever under a starless sky, and 3 figures walking endlessly between the rows, searching for a home they'd never find, carrying handfuls of black seeds that whispered promises in the dark. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I can still hear those whispers. They tell me that the Wheelers found what they were looking for after all, a way to keep their family together, a way to hold on to their land forever. They just had to become something else first, something that could walk the boundaries of their lost kingdom for eternity, something that could survive on darkness and despair. And sometimes, when I drive that stretch of Route 50, I roll up my windows and lock my doors, no matter how hot it gets. Because I know now that the Wheelers aren't just walking, they're sowing those black seeds along the highway, one by one, waiting for them to take root in the hearts of passing travelers, waiting for their family to grow,